Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle journey into the depths of medieval Eastern Europe, where vast forests stretched beyond imagination, and small villages clung to clearings, like islands in a dark green sea. Tonight, we'll discover the quiet, demanding life of those who lived at the boundary between civilization and wilderness, in a time when survival depended on respecting both the land you knew and the shadows you didn't. Whether you're settling into bed or already drifting toward deep sleep, I'm grateful you're here to explore these quiet corners of history with me. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from tonight? Perhaps from a place where forests still grow thick, or maybe from a city where the wild feels very far away. It's a lovely thought, all of us finding our way to deep sleep through these ancient stories from long ago. You wake before dawn in a village where the forest watches, and today, like every day, you must gather what you need from its edge without venturing too far in. The first sound you hear is your grandmother stirring the coals in the clay oven, the soft scraping of her wooden poker against the fire-blackened bricks. You lie on the sleeping bench for a moment longer, feeling the warmth radiating from the oven's mass. It has held heat through the night, as it does every night, because letting it go cold would mean hours of work to restart it. The bench is hard, built into the wall, but you've slept on it your entire life, and your body knows every contour. The straw mattress beneath you rustles as you shift, and you can smell the dried herbs hanging from the rafters above. Yarrow, St. John's wort, chamomile, mugwort, their stems bundled with flax twine, their leaves papery and faded. Your grandmother doesn't speak yet. In these early moments, silence is its own language, a shared understanding that the day will demand enough words later. You hear her footsteps, soft in her felt shoes, as she moves to the water bucket. The water will be cold, it always is, but she'll heat some for washing in the small iron pot that sits eternally at the edge of the oven's fire. You know she's already been awake for some time. Old women in your village rarely sleep long. They say the boundary between sleeping and waking grows thin with age, as does the boundary between this world and the next. You rise, your feet finding the packed earth floor. The cottage is one room, perhaps 12 paces long and 8 wide, with walls made of logs chinked with moss and clay. The ceiling is low enough that your father must duck beneath the central beam. Light comes through a single small window, its opening covered now with a stretched bladder, scraped thin enough to let in a milky glow. In winter, this window will be shuttered entirely, and the cottage will exist in a perpetual twilight broken only by firelight. Your mother sleeps still, your infant brother at her breast. Your father and older brother left before dawn. You heard them, or perhaps you dreamed you heard them, heading to the fields that the villagers carved from the forest over generations. Every year the forest wants those fields back. Every year the men push it away again, cutting and burning, breaking the soil around stumps too large to remove. Your grandmother ladles warm water into a wooden bowl, and you wash your face and hands, the water turning grey as you scrub. The soap is homemade, heavy with ash and fat, and it leaves your skin feeling tight. You dress in your daily clothing, a long linen shift, yellowed from many washings, and over it a woolen overdress, dyed brown with walnut husks. The wool is thick and slightly oily, still holding some of the lanolin from the sheep, and it smells faintly of animal and smoke. Your shoes are leather, soft-soled, patched many times. In winter you'll stuff them with straw for warmth, but now, in late summer, they're adequate for the cool mornings. Your grandmother has set out breakfast. Dark bread, baked 2 days ago, dense and sour. A piece of smoked fish, its flesh the colour of amber, and a cup of kvass, the fermented drink made from old bread and water, slightly sour, slightly sweet, refreshing in its own way. You eat slowly, chewing the bread thoroughly. It's hard enough to hurt your teeth if you're careless. The fish you pick apart with your fingers, separating the bones, which you'll save for the soup pot. Nothing is wasted. Even the bones have value. Boiled long enough, they give up their nourishment. As you eat, your grandmother speaks. "Today we gather in the near forest," she says, her voice soft, textured like wood grain. "Only where the light reaches, only where the paths are clear." You nod. You've been gathering in the forest since you were old enough to walk, first clinging to your mother's skirt, then holding your grandmother's hand, now trusted to go just beyond sight of the cottage, though never alone. The forest provides what the fields and garden cannot: mushrooms, berries, nuts, medicinal herbs, firewood, materials for crafts. But the forest also takes. Everyone knows this. Every village has stories of those who went too deep, stayed too late, forgot the signs that mark safe paths from dangerous ones. Your grandmother's basket sits by the door, woven from willow withes, its handle worn smooth from decades of use. She inherited it from her mother, who wove it as a young woman. You take your own basket, smaller, newer, woven by your own hands under your grandmother's instruction. The pattern is simple but sturdy, an over-under weave that holds its shape even when loaded with heavy mushrooms or damp moss. Outside, the village is awakening fully now. There are perhaps 20 cottages, all similar to yours, arranged in a loose cluster around a central area where the well stands. The well is stone-lined, deep, and its water is cold and clean, fed by some underground source. The village is surrounded by a wooden palisade, logs driven deep into the earth and sharpened at their tops, not enough to stop a determined army, but enough to deter wolves and discourage raiders who might think twice about the effort. Beyond the palisade are the fields, strips of land worked by individual families but governed by collective decisions about when to plant, when to harvest, when to let portions lie fallow. And beyond the fields, surrounding everything like a wall that breathes and grows, is the forest. It is a mixed forest, neither purely deciduous nor purely coniferous, but a dense interweaving of both. There are oak trees so old that 10 men could not join hands around their trunks. There are birches with their papery white bark, standing in groves where the light falls dappled and soft. There are pines and spruces dark and dense, holding onto their needles through winter. There are ash and alder, hazel and hornbeam, each with its own character, its own uses, its own place in the forest hierarchy. The forest is not silent. As you and your grandmother pass through the gate in the palisade, nodding to the man who watches there, old Piotr, who lost 3 fingers to frostbite years ago, but whose eyes remain sharp, the forest announces itself. Birds call, the harsh cry of jays, the drumming of woodpeckers, the varied songs of smaller birds whose names you know in your own language, but which have no universal translation. Somewhere deeper, a woodpecker drums a rapid rhythm against dead wood. The sound carries, echoing slightly, and you can judge by its quality that the tree is hollow, that it might fall in the next strong wind. Your grandmother leads you along a path. It is not a path made by human intention alone, but rather a route that humans have adopted, following the logic that animals understood first, the easiest way through the undergrowth, avoiding the wettest ground, skirting the densest thickets. The path is marked subtly, a cairn of 3 stones here, a slash in a tree's bark there, signs that say, this way is known, this way we have returned from. The morning light is still low, filtering through the canopy and shafts that illuminate floating motes of dust and pollen. The air is cool and humid, rich with the smell of earth and growing things and decay, because the forest floor is always in the process of both, always transforming fallen leaves and dead wood into the soil that feeds new growth. Your feet know this path, can read its surface, the slippery smoothness of exposed roots, the give of deep leaf litter, the firmness of packed earth where many feet have trodden. Your grandmother stops frequently, her eyes scanning the forest floor, the tree trunks, the lower branches. She is teaching you without words now, letting you observe, trusting that you will see what she sees. Here, a cluster of mushrooms, their caps brown and dry-looking, growing from the base of a rotting log. She nods, and you carefully cut them with your knife, a small blade, sharp, horn-handled, taking only the larger specimens, leaving the smaller ones to grow and spread their spores. The mushrooms go into your basket. They are not the prized boletes or chanterelles, which are rarer and more delicious, but they are good mushrooms, safe, nutritious, worth the gathering. Later, back at the cottage, you will clean them, brushing away the forest debris and string them on twine to dry in the rafters, where they will hang alongside the herbs, slowly desiccating until they are light and papery, capable of being stored through winter and into the hungry months of early spring. You walk deeper, but not too deep. Your grandmother has an internal map of safety, invisible lines she will not cross. You understand some of her reasoning. Certain areas are too far from the village to risk being caught there at dusk. Certain groves are too dense to see danger approaching. Certain places simply feel wrong, possess an atmosphere that raises the hair on your neck, that makes your breath come shallow. She stops again, this time beside a birch tree. She runs her hand over its bark, feeling for something. Then she takes out her knife and carefully, with practiced precision, makes a horizontal cut through the outer bark. She works the edge of the blade beneath the cut, then slowly, gently, peels away a large sheet of bark. It comes away clean, white on its inner surface, marked with the subtle lines of the tree's growth. She rolls it carefully and tucks it into her basket. For writing? You ask, your voice quiet because loud voices feel wrong here. For the roof? She replies. Your father will layer it under the thatch. It keeps the rain from rotting the wood. But you know it can also be used for writing, for leaving messages, for recording things that matter. The birch bark is smooth and pale, and charcoal or berry juice marks it clearly. You have seen your grandmother make such marks, signs and symbols that she says have meaning, though she has never taught you to read them. You find berries next, late-season raspberries, red and soft, growing where the forest opens slightly, where a large tree must have fallen years ago, creating a gap in the canopy that let in enough light for the berry canes to thrive. The berries are warm from the morning sun that has just begun to reach them, and their juice stains your fingers. You and your grandmother pick methodically, filling a small birch bark container that she has brought for this purpose. Some berries you eat as you pick. This is allowed, expected even, a small payment from the forest for the work of gathering. The taste is concentrated summer, sweet and tart together. The tiny drupelets bursting against your tongue, seeds catching in your teeth. You think about how these berries will taste in winter, when your grandmother boils them with honey and serves them alongside boiled grain, a small luxury in the monotony of preserved foods. As you pick, your grandmother begins to hum. It is not quite a song, more a rhythmic sound, a way of marking time and presence. You know she does this deliberately, that she believes, and has taught you to believe, that the forest should always know you are there, that moving through it in silence is a kind of lie, a sneaking that invites mistrust. Better to announce yourself, to move with respect but without deception. The humming is also practical. It warns away animals. It keeps the two of you connected even when the berry canes create a small barrier of space between you. And perhaps it does something else, something your grandmother has not fully explained but which you sense. It creates a thread of human sound, a reminder of who you are, a protection against losing yourself in the forest's own rhythms. You notice how the light changes as the morning progresses. The shafts become less dramatic, more diffused, as the sun rises higher. The temperature warms, but only slightly. The forest holds coolness the way it holds moisture in its deep shade, in its layers of soil and fallen leaves. You hear more sounds now. The rustle of small animals in the undergrowth, the distant hammering of a woodpecker, and once, far off, a sound that might be a deer moving through brush, or might be something else. Your grandmother finishes with the berries and moves on. She's looking for something specific now. You can tell by the way her eyes scan, the way she occasionally lifts her face to read the wind, to smell the air. She leads you to a small clearing, and there, growing in the dappled shade at its edge, she finds what she seeks, a stand of plants with broad leaves and small, unremarkable flowers. Comfrey, she says, kneeling with a small grunt of effort. Her knees are not what they were. You can hear them creak like green wood in a fire. For poultices, for healing. She uses a small digging stick carved smooth to loosen the earth around one plant's base. She works carefully, trying not to break the roots, because the roots are where the medicine lives strongest. The soil here is dark and rich, and it clings to the pale roots as she lifts the plant free. She takes only one plant from the stand, leaving the others to continue their growth, to make seeds, to ensure that next year and the year after, this clearing will still provide. The plant goes into her basket, roots and all. You know that back at the cottage she will wash those roots thoroughly, then either use them fresh or slice them thin and dry them, depending on her immediate needs and her assessment of her stored medicines. Your grandmother is the village healer, not the only one, but one of the most respected, the one people come to for difficult births, for fevers that won't break, for wounds that might turn bad, for the 100 small ailments that afflict people who live close to the earth and work it with their hands. As you rise to leave the clearing, a shadow passes overhead. You both look up instinctively. A large bird, an eagle you think, or perhaps a hawk of unusual size, circles above the opening in the canopy. It rides the air currents with barely a wing beat, its flight effortless, its gaze scanning the forest floor for prey. You watch it for a long moment, and your grandmother watches too, her face unreadable. "They see everything," she says finally. "From up there we are just small things moving, no different than mice or rabbits." There is something in her tone, a reminder perhaps, that for all your human cleverness, your tools and your fire and your cottages, you remain part of the forest's food web, subject to its laws. The bird circles once more, then glides away, disappearing beyond the tree line. Your baskets are filling now. Besides the mushrooms, the berries, the birch bark and the comfrey, you have also gathered a handful of pine cones, still green, which can be boiled for their pitch, some strands of useful moss, good for chinking gaps in walls or for packing wounds, and several particularly straight hazel branches, which your father will use for making fishing weirs or wattle fences. The sun is higher now, and you judge it to be mid-morning. Your grandmother has taught you to read time by the light, by the angle of shadows, by the behaviour of animals and the feel of the air. Clocks exist, you have heard of them, but they are things of cities and monasteries, not of villages like yours, where time is measured in seasons and days, in the rhythms of work and rest, in the spacing between bells that might ring from a church several villages away, if the wind is right. Your grandmother begins to lead you back, following the same path you came in on, noting the landmarks, the lightning-struck oak, the 3 stones, the distinctive route that arches across the path like a giant's knuckle. As you walk, she speaks again, her voice taking on a different quality, the quality it has when she's teaching something important. "The forest gives," she says, "but it requires respect. We take only what we need. We leave offerings. We do not go where we are not welcome." You have heard variations of this speech many times, but you listen anyway, because each time there might be some new detail, some additional wisdom. "There are places," she continues, "where the forest is different, older, where the trees grow in strange ways, where the light falls wrong, where the air feels thick. We do not go to those places, not without reason, not without preparation." "What kind of preparation?" you ask, though you have asked before. "Prayer," she says, "offerings, the right words, the right time, and even then, perhaps it is better not to go at all." You walk in silence for a while, and then she speaks again, her voice even softer. "Your mother's sister," she says. "She went into the forest alone, looking for herbs that grew only in the deep places. This was before you were born. She was young, confident. She thought she knew the forest. You know this story, but like the speech about respect, it bears repeating, each telling adding small details. They found her 3 days later," your grandmother says, "at the edge of the village just outside the palisade. She was alive, but changed. She could not speak clearly. Her eyes looked through people, not at them. She lived for another year, but she was never quite present. The forest had taken something from her, even though it returned her body. What took it, you ask, the question that is always asked. Your grandmother is quiet for a long moment. Perhaps nothing took it, she says finally. Perhaps she simply went too deep, stayed too long, lost the thread that connects us to our human life. The forest is not evil, child, but it is not human either. It has its own laws, its own logic, and if we forget ourselves there, we can become lost in ways that have nothing to do with paths. You emerge from the forest into the bright sunlight of the cleared land, and the sudden openness is almost shocking after the enclosed dimness of the trees. The village walls are ahead, and you can see smoke rising from cottage chimneys, can hear the sounds of daily life, chickens clucking, a dog barking, someone's axe biting into wood with a rhythmic thunk. Your grandmother pauses at the forest's edge, and you pause with her. She reaches into her basket and takes out a small piece of the bread you brought with you, wrapped in cloth. She crumbles it carefully and scatters the crumbs at the base of a large pine that marks the forest's boundary. "Thank you," she says quietly, addressing the forest itself, "for what you have given us today." You watch the crumbs settle among the pine needles, knowing they will be gone by evening, taken by birds or mice or ants. Return to the forest in a different form. This is the offering she spoke of, the acknowledgement that what you have taken was a gift, not a right. As you walk back toward the village gate, your basket heavy with the morning's gathering, you find yourself thinking about your aunt whom you never met, about what it means to lose yourself in the forest, about the boundaries between the safe and the dangerous, the known and the unknown. You think about the birds circling overhead, seeing everything, seeing nothing that matters to it personally. You think about the darkness under the trees, the way paths can look different when you walk them alone, the feeling of being watched that sometimes settles on you in the deeper groves, and you wonder, as you pass through the gate and enter the village proper, nodding to old Piotr who still keeps his patient watch, if your grandmother's warnings are enough, if knowing the rules is the same as being safe, if there might come a day when the forest's pull is stronger than your fear. But these are thoughts for another time. Now there is work to do. Mushrooms to clean and string, herbs to sort and store, berries to preserve, and your grandmother's knowledge to absorb piece by piece, like water soaking into dry earth, preparing you for the seasons ahead and the endless, careful negotiation between village and wilderness that defines your life. The afternoon finds you in the cottage's small garden plot, the space between your home and the next dwelling where your family has cultivated useful plants for as long as anyone remembers. Your grandmother sits on a low stool near the doorway, cleaning the mushrooms you gathered this morning, her fingers working with the automatic precision of long practice. She brushes away bits of forest floor, inspects each cap and stem for the tiny holes that might indicate worms, and sets the acceptable ones aside for stringing. You're weeding between the rows of herbs that grow here in the sunlight, plants that prefer cultivation to the forest's shade, or that need to be close at hand for daily use. Your hands move through the familiar motions, pulling the unwanted plants, feeling for the resistance that tells you when roots are breaking free from soil, shaking the dirt loose so it falls back to feed what remains. The earth here is different from the forest floor, looser, more worked, enriched by years of ash from the oven and waste from the household. The careful composting of everything organic that cannot be used in any other way. The garden grows in distinct sections, though to an outsider it might look chaotic. There is method in what seems like disorder. Near the cottage wall where the oven's warmth seeps through, delicate plants that appreciate extra heat even in summer. Further out, the hardier herbs, the ones that can tolerate full sun and occasional neglect. At the garden's far edge, the plants with spreading roots that might become invasive if allowed too close. Horseradish, mint, Comfrey's cousins. You recognise each plant by touch as much as by sight. Here is dill, its feathery leaves releasing their distinctive scent as your fingers brush past. There is sage, fuzzy-leaved and grey-green, already woody at its base though the growing season is not yet finished. Thyme creeps along the ground, forming a low mat that releases fragrance when stepped upon. Chives stand in a tight clump, their hollow leaves like tiny green tubes, some of them bearing the dried remains of purple flowers that bloomed earlier in the summer. Your mother emerges from the cottage, your baby brother bound to her chest with a long strip of linen wrapped in the way that keeps him secure and leaves her hands free for work. He sleeps, his small face slack and peaceful, his breathing so quiet you can barely detect it. Your mother's own face shows the tiredness of broken sleep, the particular exhaustion of nursing an infant, but her movements are steady as she joins your grandmother at the mushroom cleaning. They speak in low voices, the kind of conversation that happens between women who have shared a household for years, shorthand and half-finished sentences that nevertheless communicate everything necessary. You hear fragments. The miller's daughter, fever for 3 days, willow bark, but also their voices are rhythmic, almost melodic, rising and falling like a gentle stream over stones. You move to the next row, where the medicinal plants grow, the ones your grandmother uses in her healing work. These you weed with extra care, making certain not to disturb their roots or damage their leaves. There is feverfew with its small daisy-like flowers, good for headaches and the pains that women suffer monthly. There is plantain, not the fruit, but the common weed that most people overlook, which your grandmother says is worth more than gold for drawing poison from wounds. There is calendula, its bright orange flowers beginning to fade now as summer draws toward autumn, every petal useful for salves and healing oils. Your grandmother taught you these plants' names in your own language, but she also taught you their other names, the older words that she says have power. She speaks sometimes of a time when all healing knowledge was preserved in such words, in chants and songs that help the healer remember which plant for which ailment, which preparation for which season. The words were prayers and recipes and histories all woven together, she says, before people began to write things down on birch bark and parchment, before knowledge became something fixed rather than something living. A chicken wanders into the garden. They are supposed to be confined to their own yard, but they are clever escape artists, capable of squeezing through gaps that seem impossibly small. This one is a brown hen, one of 5 that your family keeps. She pecks at the ground, searching for insects, and you shoo her away gently before she can do damage to the tender plants. She squawks her indignation but retreats, returning to the dusty area near the cottage where the chickens take their dirt baths, rolling and fluffing to discourage mites and lice. The sun is past its zenith now, beginning the long, slow descent toward evening. The quality of light changes, becomes slightly more golden, slightly more slanted. You can feel the day's warmth soaking into your shoulders, into the dark fabric of your overdress, and you're grateful for it, storing the sensation against the memory of winter's cold, which is never far from consciousness, even in summer's height. Your grandmother calls you over. The mushrooms are cleaned and ready for stringing. She has prepared several lengths of strong thread, not flax, which might rot from the mushroom's residual moisture, but thin strips of sinew from the deer your father killed last autumn, processed and dried and now perfect for this purpose. You sit beside her, and she demonstrates again, though you have done this many times, how to thread the sinew through the mushroom stem without splitting it, how to space them so air can circulate, how to tie the end securely so the whole string can be hung from the rafters. Your fingers are smaller than hers, more nimble, and soon you develop a rhythm. Pierce, slide, space, pierce, again. The mushrooms make a soft sound as they touch each other, a whisper of fungi threaded like beads. Your grandmother hums as she works beside you, the same wordless melody from the forest, and you find yourself matching your breathing to its rhythm, finding a meditative quality in the repetitive work. Your aunt, your grandmother says suddenly, returning to the morning story as if no time has passed. She was looking for ghost pipe. Do you know it? You shake your head, keeping your eyes on your work. It grows in the deepest forest, she continues, her voice taking on the teaching quality again. A strange plant, white as bone, without green colour because it takes no nourishment from the sun. It grows on the roots of trees, stealing what they have gathered. Some call it corpse plant. Others call it Indian pipe, though I do not know why. Her fingers pause in their work and she looks at you directly. It is powerful medicine for pain, for the kind of pain that other remedies cannot touch. But it is also dangerous. It grows in places where the forest is concentrated, where the old things still hold sway. You want to ask what old things, but you sense that this is not the right moment, that your grandmother is building towards something and should not be interrupted. She was not wrong to seek it, your grandmother says. A child in the next village was dying, screaming with pain that no one could ease. Your aunt was brave and skilled and thought she could find the ghost pipe and return safely. She knew the warnings. She carried iron and salt. She said the right prayers. But your grandmother returns to her mushroom stringing and the silence stretches. You wait, threading your own mushrooms, understanding that the story will continue when she is ready. But knowledge is not the same as wisdom, she finally says. Knowledge tells you where the ghost pipe grows. Wisdom tells you that some prices are too high, that some medicines cost more than the healing they provide. Your aunt had knowledge. She was still learning wisdom. The string of mushrooms grows longer in your hands. You tie off the end and start another. The pile of cleaned mushrooms is diminishing, and soon you will have several long garlands ready for hanging. They will dangle from the rafters like strange necklaces, slowly drying, concentrating their flavours, becoming lighter and harder until winter, when they will be reconstituted in hot water and added to soups and stews, bringing a taste of the forest into the dark months. Your mother rises with the baby, who is beginning to stir, and goes into the cottage. You hear her settling onto the sleeping bench, preparing to nurse. The cottage is dim inside. The fire is banked low during the day to avoid heating the space unnecessarily, and you imagine her there in the shadows, the baby latching on with the small desperate sounds of infant hunger, her own body responding with the letting down of milk, this oldest of exchanges, this mammalian gift that requires nothing but presence and patience. Your grandmother stands, her knees crackling like twigs, and stretches her back. "Come," she says. "There is something I want to show you before your father and brother return from the fields." You follow her, not into the cottage but around its side to a small shed where tools are stored. The family's scythe and sickle, spare handles for axes and hammers, coils of rope made from twisted bark, the various implements of agricultural life. But your grandmother ignores these. Instead, she moves to the back corner of the shed, where shadows are deepest, and reaches behind a stack of clay pots to retrieve something wrapped in old linen. She unwraps it carefully, revealing a bundle of dried plants, tied together at their stems. Even dried, you can see that these are unusual, not the common herbs of garden and forest, but something else. The stems are thick and woody, the leaves crisp but still retaining a strange silvery quality, and at the top of each stalk is the dried remnant of a flower, unlike any you have seen growing in the village's vicinity. Wormwood, your grandmother says, Artemisia, named for the goddess of the hunt, the moon, the wild places. She holds the bundle carefully with a respect that borders on reverence. It does not grow naturally near here. I gathered this many years ago, when I travelled to my mother's village to learn from her teacher, the healer who taught her, and who agreed to teach me. You look at the dried plants with new interest. Your grandmother rarely speaks of that time, of the journey she made as a young woman, of the knowledge she gained in those months away from home. Wormwood is strong medicine, she continues. Too strong if used carelessly. It drives out parasites, the worms that sometimes live in people's bellies, making them sick and tired. It can ease women's monthly pains, can help bring on courses that have stopped. It can be used in rituals of cleansing and protection. But it can also cause visions, can disturb the mind, can poison if the dose is wrong. She rewraps the bundle carefully, restoring it to its hiding place. I show you this not so you will use it. You are not ready, may not be ready for years, but so you will know it exists. So you will understand that there are layers to this knowledge, that what I teach you in the garden is only the beginning. You nod, understanding that you are being entrusted with something, that this moment is a marker of some kind, a boundary being crossed in your education. When I was your age, your grandmother says, I thought I wanted to know everything immediately. I was impatient with my mother's slow teaching, with the endless repetition of simple things. I wanted the powerful herbs, the dramatic cures, the recognition of being a great healer. She smiles slightly, a complicated expression that holds both amusement and sadness. My mother made me weed the same garden beds for an entire summer, just weeding, nothing else. I thought I would die of boredom. But by the end of that summer I knew every plant so intimately that I could identify them by the shape of their first leaves, by the smell of their crushed stems, by the texture of their roots. I knew which ones spread by runners, which by seed, which needed full sun, which preferred shade. I knew the rhythm of their growth, could predict when they would flower, could sense when they needed water even before they began to wilt. She looks at you directly. That summer was worth more than all the dramatic knowledge that came later, because healing is not about the rare and powerful medicines. Those are needed only occasionally. Healing is about the daily herbs, the common remedies, the patient observation of how bodies work, how plants work, how they interact. It is about being so familiar with the ordinary that you notice immediately when something is extraordinary. You absorb this, storing it alongside all the other teachings, the accumulated wisdom that your grandmother dispenses in fragments and moments, building in you a foundation you are only beginning to recognize as such. The afternoon continues its slow progression toward evening. You return to the garden, completing the weeding, then help your grandmother hang the strung mushrooms from the rafters inside the cottage, where they join last year's remaining dried foods, strings of wild onions, bundles of herbs, a braid of garlic cloves. The rafters are a pantry, a pharmacy, a library of preserved knowledge in plant form. Your father and brother return as the sun touches the tree line, their shirts dark with sweat, their hands calloused and dirty. They smell of work and earth and growing things. They wash at the bucket outside, scrubbing their hands and faces, and then enter the cottage where your mother has been preparing the evening meal. The meal is simple but sufficient. Porridge of barley and oats, thick and filling, flavoured with onions and a small amount of the smoked fish, stretched with water and thickened with meal. There is bread, and a bit of the fresh butter your mother churned 2 days ago, precious and used sparingly. There is kvass to drink, and at the end, a small handful of the berries you gathered this morning, distributed carefully, so each person receives their fair share. You eat in the communal way, passing the single bowl of porridge around the circle, each person taking several spoonfuls before passing it on, the rhythm established by long practice. The baby nurses taking his nourishment from your mother, his tiny hand flexing and releasing against her breast. There is little conversation during the meal. Eating is serious business, requiring attention and gratitude. But afterward, as the light fades, and your mother nurses the baby to sleep, your father and brother tell of the day's work in the fields. They have been cutting hay in the water meadow, your father says, the low-lying area that floods each spring and produces the richest grass. The hay must be cut now, in the brief window when it's mature but before it begins to seed, and it must be dried quickly to prevent mould. They have been working since dawn, and still there is much to do before the weather changes. Your brother's hands, you notice, are blistered, despite the calluses he's built over the summer. Your father's face is deeply lined, carved by sun and wind and years of labour. Your grandmother asks about a particular section of the meadow, an area she remembers from her youth as being especially productive but also especially wet. prone to producing hay that moulds if not dried perfectly. Your father nods. Yes, that area is still problematic, still requires extra care and judgment about when to cut, when to turn, when to gather. The conversation is quiet, tired, the words of people who have laboured all day and will labour again tomorrow. But there is satisfaction in it too, the pleasure of work done well, of being part of the seasonal rhythms, of doing what needs doing. As full darkness settles outside, your father checks the cottage door. It has no lock, only a wooden bar that can be placed across it from inside, and your grandmother banks the fire, covering the coals with ash to preserve them through the night. The cottage settles into its nighttime configuration. Your parents, and the baby on the large sleeping bench, your brother on a smaller bench built into the opposite wall, you and your grandmother sharing the bench nearest the oven, where the residual warmth will be strongest. But before sleep, there is one more task. Your grandmother takes down a small bundle of dried herbs from the rafters, not wormwood, but a mixture of protective plants, St. John's wort, vervain, and mugwort, and places a small sprig above the door, tucked into a crack in the lintel. She does this every night, a ritual so constant you barely notice it anymore. But tonight, after the story of your lost aunt, after the talk of deep forest and dangerous plants, you watch her with new attention. What is it protecting us from, you ask quietly, aware that the others are already settling into sleep. Your grandmother is quiet for a long moment, lying beside you in the darkness. When she speaks, her voice is barely above a whisper, meant for your ears alone. Perhaps nothing, she says. Perhaps everything. The forest is not far from our door, child. Only the palisade and a few cleared fields separate us from it. And the forest is old, far older than our village, older than our language, older than our gods. It remembers things we have forgotten. It dreams things we do not understand. She shifts on the hard bench, seeking comfort for her old bones. The herbs are a reminder, more than anything. A reminder that we are small, that we are guests here, that we survive by the forest's tolerance as much as by our own efforts. A reminder to respect the boundaries, to honour the agreements, to remember what happens to those who forget. You lie in the darkness, listening to the familiar sounds of the cottage settling, the creak of wood cooling, the soft breathing of your family, the occasional pop from the banked fire. Outside you can hear the night sounds beginning, the call of an owl, distant and hollow, the rustle of wind through thatch, and underneath it all, barely audible, the vast whisper of the forest itself, breathing in the darkness beyond the walls. And you wonder, in that space between waking and sleeping, what your aunt saw in those 3 days in the forest, what knowledge she gained that she could never speak of, what price she paid for the ghost pipe she may or may not have found. You wonder if her sacrifice saved the child she sought to heal, or if it was all for nothing, a life diminished with no corresponding gain. But these thoughts dissolve as sleep claims you, pulling you down into dreams where you walk through a forest that is both familiar and strange, where the paths shift and change, where your grandmother's voice calls to you from somewhere ahead, telling you to hurry, to keep up, to remember the way home. But which way is that exactly? And how will you know it when the trees all look the same? When the light falls through the leaves in patterns that hypnotize and confuse? The weeks pass in their steady rhythm, and the forest changes its coat from green to gold and crimson. You wake each morning to find the air colder, the frost lingering longer on the ground outside the cottage, the sun rising later and setting earlier, as if reluctant to make its full journey across the sky. The harvest is coming, the time when all the summer's work will be gathered in, when the success or failure of the year will be measured in filled storage pits and laden rafters. Your father and brother spend long days in the fields now, cutting grain with rhythmic sweeps of their scythes, the sound carrying across the cleared land like a whispered conversation. Your mother works beside them when the baby sleeps, binding the cut grain into sheaves, stacking them to dry. Even you are called to help, leaving your grandmother to manage the cottage and garden alone, because every hand is needed when the weather could turn at any moment. The work is hard and repetitive. Your back aches from bending to gather the fallen grain. Your hands blister from the rough stems, even through the cloth wrappings your mother insists you wear. The chaff gets into your clothes, into your hair, makes you itch and sneeze. But there is also something satisfying in the work, in seeing the field transform from standing grain to stubble, in watching the stacks of sheaves grow taller, in knowing that each bundle represents bread for the winter, porridge for the hungry months, seed for next year's planting. In the evenings, when you return to the cottage too tired to do more than eat and sleep, your grandmother has been busy with her own preparations. She's been gathering the last of the garden's offerings before the first hard frost kills everything tender. She's been digging root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, and storing them in the pit dug beneath the cottage floor, layered with sand to keep them from rotting. She's been drying the final herbs, making preserves from the last fruits, rendering fat from the pig your father slaughtered, packing away everything that can be saved against the season of scarcity. One evening, as you sit by the fire mending a tear in your shift, the linen worn thin, patched many times already, your grandmother speaks of winter in a way she has not before. The forest changes, she says, working her spindle, drawing out wool fibre into thread with the practiced twist of her fingers. In winter, it becomes something else. The leaves fall and you can see deeper. The undergrowth dies back and paths appear that were hidden. The animals behave differently. Some sleep, some hunt with desperation, some simply endure. She pauses, her spindle hanging, slowly rotating. And the boundaries become thinner. Between the village and the forest, yes, but also between the seen and the unseen, between the living and the other things. Your mother looks up from the baby she's rocking, a question in her eyes, but she says nothing. Your father and brother are outside, securing the thatch against autumn winds, their voices a low murmur through the walls. When I was young, your grandmother continues, there was a winter so hard that the stored food ran out before spring. We ate bark bread. You don't know what that is, child, and pray you never need to learn. We ate things that should not be eaten, and people began to go into the forest desperate, looking for anything, frozen berries, nuts the squirrels had cached, even considering the moss that grows on the north side of trees. Her spindle begins to turn again, the thread growing longer. Some of those who went into the winter forest did not return, or they returned wrong, like your aunt, but worse. One man came back speaking in rhymes, unable to say anything straight. A woman returned with her hair turned white, though she was only 20. A child was found sitting in the snow, unharmed by cold, but unable to remember his own name. You set down your mending, giving her your full attention. These are not the usual cautionary tales she tells. These have sharper edges, more specific warnings. The forest in winter is hungry, she says, not in the way animals are hungry, but in a different way. It wants company, perhaps, or it simply takes what comes too close, without intention, the way frost takes the life from plants, not from malice, but from its nature. Then why do we stay, you ask? Why not move to a village farther from the forest, where there are more cleared fields, more distance from the trees? Your grandmother smiles slightly, but there is no humour in it. Because we are bound here, child. Your grandfather's grandfather's grandfather cleared this land, built the first cottage, made agreements with what was here before. We cannot simply leave, or rather we could, but we would carry the binding with us, and we would lose the protection that comes with honouring it. What agreements, you press, emboldened by her unusual openness. She sets down her spindle and looks at you directly, her eyes catching the firelight. The agreement that we take only what we need, that we leave offerings, that we stay within the bounds, that we remember the forest is not ours. We are, in a sense, its tenants, allowed to live at its edge in exchange for our respect and restraint. Your mother shifts the baby to her other arm. Tell her about the offerings, she says quietly. Tell her properly. She's old enough now. Your grandmother nods slowly. Yes, perhaps she is. She rises, moving to the corner of the cottage where various baskets and containers are stored, and returns with a small clay pot sealed with wax. She breaks the seal carefully and tips the pot so you can see inside. It contains grain. Good grain, not the damaged or stunted kernels, but plump, perfect seeds. Every autumn, she says, before the first snow, someone from the village must take an offering into the forest. Not to the edge, but deep in, to the old places. Grain, honey, good bread, sometimes a slaughtered chicken. It must be left at a specific place, marked by 3 stones arranged in a triangle, and the person who carries it must go alone, must go in silence, must not look behind them as they return. She replaces the wax seal carefully. This year it will be your father's turn. We take turns among the households, and the choice is made by drawing marked sticks from a basket. He drew the short stick at the Harvest Council 3 days ago. You feel a chill that has nothing to do with the cooling. Air. Is it dangerous? It can be, your grandmother says simply. Most years the offering is left, the person returns and nothing unusual happens. But some years, the one who goes hears things, sees things. One year, old Dmitri went and returned unable to speak for 3 days. When he could speak again, he would not say what he had seen, only that we should be grateful for the village walls and the fire in our ovens. When, you ask? When does father have to go? At the full moon, your grandmother says. 4 days from now. The cottage seems suddenly smaller, the walls thinner, the darkness outside more present. You think of your father, strong and steady, walking alone into the deep forest, into the places your grandmother has warned against your entire life. You think of him placing the offering and walking back, forbidden to look behind, while something, what, might follow, might watch, might judge whether his offering is acceptable. Can nothing be done? Your mother asks, her voice tight. Can someone not go with him, at least part of the way? Your grandmother shakes her head. The agreement is specific. One person, alone. To break the terms would be worse than not going at all. The door opens, admitting your father and brother along with a gust of cold air. They have finished their work, secured the thatch with new ropes, checked the chimney stones for cracks. Your father's face is ruddy from the wind, his hands red and rough. He looks at the 3 of you, at your grandmother holding the sealed pot, at your mother's worried expression, at your own wide eyes. An understanding crosses his face. Ah, he says, you've told them then. Your grandmother nods. They have a right to know, to prepare. Your father sits heavily on the bench, accepting the cup of warm kvass your mother pours for him. He drinks deeply, then sets the cup down. It is not the first time I've made the offering walk, he says. I did it once before, 10 years ago, before you were born. He nods at you. I went. I left the offering. I returned. It was uncomfortable, but not harmful. What did you hear? Your brother asks, speaking for the first time. He's 15, old enough to understand danger, young enough to still believe in his own invulnerability. Your father is quiet for a moment. Footsteps, he says finally. Behind me, matching my pace. I did not look back as the rules demand. But I heard them clearly, not the steps of any animal I know, not quite the steps of a human either. Something in between, perhaps, or something only pretending to be either. And? Your mother prompts when he falls silent again. And they stopped when I passed through the village gate. Whatever followed me, if anything truly did, it respected that boundary. He looks at your grandmother. The agreements hold. They have always held. But your aunt, you begin. Your aunt broke the rules, your grandmother interrupts. She went deep without permission, without offerings, seeking to take powerful plants for her own purposes. That is different from the offering walk, which is done in honour, in fulfilment of the agreement. The forest knows the difference. You want to ask how the forest knows anything, how it can judge intentions, how agreements can be made with trees and earth and shadow. But you are learning that some questions have no answers that words can hold, that some knowledge comes only through experience, through the accumulation of stories and cautions and the evidence of things that happen or fail to happen. The next days pass with a strange quality, as if the cottage exists slightly outside of normal time. Your father goes about his usual work, but you notice your mother watching him more closely, touching his shoulder as she passes, as if memorizing the feel of him. Your grandmother prepares the offering with unusual care, selecting each grain of wheat individually, adding honey from the precious store, baking a small loaf of bread using the finest flour, wrapping everything in clean linen. The full moon rises on a clear night, cold and bright. Your father eats an early supper, then dresses in his cleanest shirt, his warmest cloak. Your grandmother gives him the offering bundle and speaks words over him. Not prayers exactly, but something older, in a language you don't fully understand, syllables that seem to have weight and texture in the air. He kisses your mother, touches the baby's head, nods to you and your brother, and walks out into the moonlight. The village is quiet. Everyone knows what tonight is, and everyone stays inside behind their own walls, tending their own fires. This is not a communal ritual, but a private obligation, witnessed only by the forest itself. You stand at the small window, peering through the stretched bladder that covers it, watching your father's silhouette as he passes through the village gate and disappears into the tree line. The moon is so bright you can see the frost glittering on the ground, can make out the dark mass of the forest against the slightly lighter sky. Your grandmother stands beside you, her hand on your shoulder. "Now we wait," she says. "He should return by midnight. If he's not back by dawn..." She trails off, leaving that possibility unspoken. The hours stretch. Your mother nurses the baby, rocks him, puts him down to sleep, picks him up again when he fusses. Your brother sits by the fire, pretending to repair a tool handle, but his eyes keep darting to the door. Your grandmother returns to her spinning, but the rhythm is off, the thread uneven in a way it never usually is. You sit and watch the moon track across the small square of sky visible through the window. You think about your father walking through the dark forest, following a path he's walked only once before, carrying an offering to something that may or may not be there, may or may not care, may or may not accept what is given. You think about the footsteps he heard 10 years ago, the sound of something following, something that stopped at the village boundary because... why? Because of the palisade, because of the agreement, because of some quality in the village itself, some accumulated human presence that the forest will not cross. The moon reaches its zenith and begins to descend. Your mother has stopped even pretending to occupy herself. She simply sits, staring at the door, her hands folded in her lap, her lips moving in what might be prayer, and then a sound outside. Footsteps. Human footsteps, you think, but in your heightened state of awareness you cannot be certain. They approach the cottage and there is a scraping sound as the door bar is lifted from outside. The door opens and your father enters. He looks pale in the firelight, and there is something in his eyes. Not fear exactly, but a kind of deep tiredness, as if he has seen something that requires processing, that cannot be immediately understood or dismissed. But he is whole, undamaged, present. Your mother rises and goes to him, and he holds her tightly for a long moment. Your grandmother brings him kvass, and he drinks it all, then asks for more. His hands, you notice, are shaking slightly. "It is done," he says finally. "The offering is left. The agreement is honoured for another year." "Did you hear anything?" your brother asks, unable to contain his curiosity. Your father looks at him, then at you, then at your grandmother. "Yes," he says simply. "I heard many things, but they are not for speaking of. Not tonight. Perhaps not ever." He moves to the sleeping bench and sits heavily. "What matters is that I went, I returned, and the balance is maintained. Your grandmother nods, satisfied. That is enough. That is all. That is required. But later, as the household settles into sleep, you hear your father speaking quietly to your mother, his voice so low you can barely make out the words. You catch only fragments, singing, but not human. Light between the trees, the stones were warm as if, and then your mother's soft murmur, comforting, accepting, asking nothing more. You lie awake long after the others have slept, watching the moonlight move across the cottage floor, thinking about agreements and boundaries, about the line between the village and the forest, between the known and the unknown, between stories told to frighten children and truths too complex for simple telling. And you wonder what the winter will bring, when the forest stands bare and the boundaries thin, when the cold drives both animals and humans to desperation, when the agreements will be tested again in ways you cannot yet imagine. The snow comes early this year, falling in thick silence during the night, transforming the world by morning into something hushed and white and strange. You wake to a different quality of light, brighter somehow, reflected upward from the ground through the small window, filling the cottage with a pale glow that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere. Your grandmother is already awake, as always, stirring the fire that has burned low through the night. The cottage is cold despite the banked coals, and you can see your breath misting in the air. You burrow deeper into the thin blanket for a moment longer, reluctant to leave the small warmth you have created. But duty calls, and you rise, your feet finding the packed earth floor, now ice cold beneath your soles. Outside, the snow has covered everything. The garden plots, the path to the well, the village commons, the palisade walls. It is perhaps a hand's breadth deep, not yet the heavy accumulations that will come later in winter, but enough to muffle sounds, to make the familiar landscape seem foreign. The forest beyond the fields is a dark line against the white ground and grey sky, its bare branches like cracks in the world. Your father and brother have already left for the animal shelter, a structure built against the outer wall of the palisade where the village's livestock huddle together for warmth through the cold months. The cattle and goats must be fed, watered, milked. The work does not cease because snow falls. If anything, it intensifies. Animals confined to shelter create their own problems, require more attention, more careful management to keep them healthy through the months when they cannot graze. Your mother is nursing the baby, who seems fretful this morning, perhaps sensing the changed atmosphere, the tension that winter brings. Food stores must now be carefully managed. Every meal must be planned against the knowledge that spring is months away, that nothing will grow until the earth thaws, that what you have now is all you will have, and it must last. Breakfast is thin porridge, stretched with extra water to make it go further, flavoured with a pinch of salt and nothing more. You eat slowly, making each spoonful count, feeling the warmth of it spread through your belly if not quite satisfying your hunger. This is how winter begins, with small deprivations, little reductions that will accumulate over the months until spring arrives, and everyone in the village looks gaunt, hollow-eyed, depleted. After breakfast, you help your grandmother with the day's tasks. First, checking the storage pit beneath the floor, making sure the root vegetables remain sound, removing any that show signs of rot before they can spread decay to the others. The pit is dark and earthy smelling, cold but not freezing, and you work by feel as much as sight, your fingers learning to distinguish firm turnips from softening ones, healthy carrots from those beginning to deteriorate. Then there is water to fetch from the well, harder now because the path is slippery and the bucket seems heavier when you must walk carefully to avoid falling. The well itself has not frozen yet, but it will, and then someone will need to break the ice each morning, another task added to the endless list of winter work. Your grandmother watches you return with the water bucket, her expression measuring. "You're growing stronger," she says. "That is good. Winter requires strength, not the strength of one great effort, but the strength to continue day after day when there is no variety, no relief, only the same tasks repeated in the cold and dark. You pour the water into the large clay vessel that sits near the oven, trying not to spill any. Water is precious when fetching it requires such effort. Your grandmother dips out what she needs for cooking, for mixing with ground grain to make the day's bread, for the various tasks that require moisture. The bread making is a daily ritual, as constant as sunrise. Your grandmother takes a measure of ground rye. The wheat is too precious for everyday use, and mixes it with water and a piece of saved dough from yesterday's baking, which carries the sourness that makes the bread rise. She works it with her strong hands, kneading rhythm into the mass, folding and pressing until it achieves the right texture. Then it sits near the oven's warmth, covered with a cloth, slowly rising while she tends to other tasks. You sit beside her, carding wool, preparing the sheep's fleece for spinning by combing it until the fibres align, removing the tangles and debris, creating soft clouds of fibre that will eventually become thread, then cloth, then clothing. The work is meditative, repetitive, and your hands learn their own wisdom, working without conscious thought while your mind drifts. Your grandmother begins to speak, her voice taking on the quality it has when she's teaching something important. Winter is when the old stories are told, she says, when the dark comes early and stays late, when there is nothing to do after supper but sit by the fire and remember. The stories keep us company, they keep us human. She pauses in her work, her hands still for a moment, but they also keep us cautious. They remind us why the rules exist, why we must maintain the boundaries, why certain things must not be forgotten. You know she is leading somewhere, building towards something, so you simply nod and continue carding, waiting. There was a winter, she says, perhaps 50 years ago before I was born, but the story was told to me by those who lived through it. The snow came early, as it has this year, and it kept coming. By midwinter, it was higher than a man's head in the drifts. The village was cut off. No travellers could come or go. The food stores began to run low. Her hands resumed their work, kneading the bread dough with steady pressure. People became desperate. Some proposed hunting in the deep forest despite the winter prohibition. Others suggested taking more from the forest's edge than the agreements allowed. There was talk of desperation, of survival justifying any action. She shapes the dough into its final form, placing it in the clay baking vessel. But the village elder, a woman in those days, a healer like I am, she forbade it. She said the agreements must hold, especially in hard times, perhaps most of all in hard times. She said if we broke faith with the forest in winter, when we were weak, we would have nothing to return to when strength came back. The bread goes into the oven, and your grandmother closes the door carefully, sealing in the heat. Some listened, others did not. 3 men went into the deep forest one night, carrying weapons, seeking to hunt deer or wild boar, anything with meat. They went together, thinking numbers would protect them. You feel the familiar tightening in your chest that comes when these stories turn dark, when the lesson approaches. One man returned the next day, alive but senseless, his mind gone. He lived another 10 years but never spoke, never seemed to recognise even his own children. The other 2 were found a week later when the snow melted enough to allow searching. They were sitting at the base of a great oak, frozen solid, their eyes open, their faces showing no distress. They looked as if they had simply decided to sit down and rest, and had forgotten to rise again. Your grandmother looks at you directly. The woman who was elder, she performed the burial rites, and she reinforced the agreements with new offerings. The village survived that winter, barely, eating bark and boiled leather when the stored food ran out. But they survived because they maintained the balance, even when breaking it seemed like the only path to salvation. The cottage is quiet except for the crackling of the fire, the baby's soft breathing, the distant sound of wind beginning to rise outside. You think about those 3 men, about the desperation that drove them to break the prohibition, about the price they paid. You think about your father's offering walk, about the footsteps he heard, about the many layers of agreement and consequence that govern life at the forest's edge. Does the forest hate us, you ask, surprising yourself with the question. Your grandmother considers this for a long moment. No, she says finally, I do not think it hates. Hate is a human feeling, requiring intention and emotion. The forest is indifferent, perhaps. It follows its own laws, which are not our laws. When we honour the agreements, we align ourselves with those laws, and the forest tolerates our presence. When we break them, we become dissonant. And dissonance has consequences, though not from malice. A wolf that takes a sheep is not acting from hate. It is acting from its nature. So too with the forest. She returns to her work, checking the bread, adjusting the fire. But there are things in the forest, she continues, her voice dropping slightly, that are not merely forest. Old things, perhaps. Things that remember when humans were fewer and more careful. Things that watch and wait and judge. Whether they are spirits or simply the forest's own awareness given form, I cannot say. But they are real in their effects, and that is what matters. The day progresses in its winter rhythm, slower than summer days, more constrained, measured by the limited light and the need to conserve resources. Your father and brother return at midday, bringing milk from the cows, reporting that the animals seem well enough but restless in their confinement. Your mother serves the midday meal, more thin porridge, a piece of yesterday's bread, a small portion of preserved cabbage from the pit. After eating, your father sits by the fire, working on a tool handle that needs replacing. Your brother joins him, learning by watching, occasionally asking questions that your father answers in few words. The work of men continues even in winter. There are always tools to repair, equipment to maintain, preparations to make for the spring planting that seems impossibly far away, but will arrive whether you are ready or not. You and your grandmother spend the afternoon spinning, she at her drop spindle, you at a simpler version, both of you turning the carded wool into thread that will eventually be woven into cloth. The work is endless. A family needs clothing, bedding, wrappings, and all of it comes from sheep's fleece transformed through hours and hours of labour into something useful. As the light begins to fail, so early now, the sun barely climbing before it starts its descent, your grandmother rises and moves to the door. She opens it briefly, letting in a blast of cold air, and places something on the threshold. A small piece of bread from the midday meal, a pinch of salt, a few drops of the precious honey. Winter offering, she says, closing the door quickly. Small but regular, to remind what watches that we remember, that we honour our obligations. That night, as the family gathers around the fire after supper, your father tells a story. Something he rarely does, that being more your grandmother's role. But tonight, perhaps feeling the weight of a winter settling in, perhaps wanting to contribute to the keeping of knowledge, he speaks. My grandfather, he says, told me once about a winter traveller, a stranger who came to the village when the snow was deep seeking shelter. The village was wary. Strangers in winter bring risk, might be thieves or carry disease, but the elder of that time allowed him to stay because to turn away someone from the cold is to sentence them to death, and that brings its own consequences. Your brother leans forward, interested. The baby sleeps in your mother's arms, and even your grandmother has set down her spinning to listen. The stranger stayed 3 days, your father continues. He was quiet, polite, ate little, and spent most of his time sitting by whatever fire he was near, staring into the flames. On the 3rd night he spoke to the elder, thanking her for the hospitality, and he said something strange. He said, "You keep the old ways here. That is good. That is why your village endures when others have failed. Continue as you do, and the forest will not trouble you beyond the usual tolls." Your father pauses, feeding another piece of wood to the fire. The elder asked him who he was, how he knew these things, and he smiled and said, "I am someone who walks between. I carry messages when they need carrying. The forest knows you here, knows your names, knows your faithfulness. That knowledge protects you, but it also binds you. Remember that." And the next morning he was gone. His tracks led to the forest edge and then vanished, as if he had simply ceased to exist, or had been absorbed by the trees themselves. The cottage is very quiet. Outside, the wind has picked up, and you can hear it pushing against the walls, testing the thatch, seeking entry. Was he real, your brother asks, or a spirit wearing human form? Your father shrugs. Does it matter? The message was real, the warning was real, and we are still here, generations later, still keeping the ways, still making the offerings, still respecting the boundaries. Perhaps that is answer enough. Your grandmother nods slowly. The forest sends teachers when it chooses, she says, sometimes through story, sometimes through consequence, sometimes through strangers who come and go. We would be foolish not to learn. The evening deepens into night, and one by one the family settles into sleep. You lie on your bench, wrapped in your thin blanket, listening to the wind and thinking about the long winter ahead, about the cold and hunger that will grow worse before they grow better, about the endless negotiation between village and forest that defines every aspect of your life. And you wonder what lessons this winter will bring, what test will come, and whether you and your family will have the wisdom and strength to pass them, to emerge into spring still whole, still faithful, still part of the ancient agreement that keeps the darkness at bay. The change comes slowly, so gradually that you almost miss it at first. A shift in the quality of light, a softening in the air's brutal edge, a sound of water dripping from the cottage eaves where ice has begun to melt in the midday sun. Winter has held the village in its grip for what feels like lifetimes, and now, finally, it begins to loosen its fingers. You stand outside the cottage, breathing air that no longer hurts your lungs, watching the snow recede in patches, revealing the dark earth beneath. The revelation is both wonderful and troubling. Wonderful because it means survival, means the worst is past, but troubling because the earth looks exhausted, depleted, as thin and worn as the people who have endured the cold months. Your family has made it through, though barely. The baby survived his first winter, though he is smaller than he should be, his cheeks less round, his limbs thinner. Your mother's milk has been scant, affected by her own hunger, and there were nights when the baby cried and cried, unsatisfied, and nothing could be done but hold him and wait for morning. Your brother grew taller but not broader, his frame stretching without enough nourishment to fill it out. Your father moves more slowly now, his face deeply lined, aged by the constant worry of rationing, of making impossible decisions about who eats what and how much. Your grandmother weathered the winter as she has weathered so many others, but you notice she moves more stiffly now, that her hands shake slightly when she works, that sometimes she forgets the middle of sentences and must pause to gather her thoughts. Winter takes something from everyone, but it takes most from the old, and you feel a flutter of fear when you think about how many winters she might have left. The village emerges from its winter hibernation like a creature from a burrow, blinking in the light, taking stock of losses. 2 of the old people died in the deep cold, not unexpectedly, but their absence is felt nonetheless. One family lost all their chickens to a weasel that found its way into their shelter. Another family's cow went dry and never recovered, a devastating blow that will affect them for years. But most families survived, most animals endured, and now the work of spring begins. The first task is assessing the damage, walking the boundaries, checking what the winter has done to structures and stores. Your father and the other men walk the palisade, replacing posts that have rotted or cracked, reinforcing sections where snow weight has pushed the logs askew. They check the animal shelters, The storage buildings, the well cover. Everything must be sound before the spring work can truly begin. Your grandmother takes you into the forest on a mild day when the sun actually provides warmth, not just light. The snow is nearly gone here under the trees, melted faster in the forest shelter, and the earth is soft and muddy beneath your feet. You wear your winter boots still, stuffed with straw because the ground is too wet and cold for lighter footwear. Spring is when the forest wakes, your grandmother says as you walk the familiar path. Everything that slept begins to stir. Roots draw water, seeds split open. Animals emerge hungry and urgent. It is a dangerous time in its way. All that desperate energy, all that need. You're looking for the first spring plants, the ones that push through even before the last snow melts. Early greens that can supplement the exhausted winter stores, providing nourishment and variety after months of monotonous preserved foods. Your grandmother has taught you to identify them. Ramps with their broad leaves and onion smell, nettles that sting but are rich with nutrients once cooked, chickweed tender and mild, dandelion greens before they become too bitter. You find a patch of ramps and begin to harvest them, using your knife to cut the greens and carefully dig some of the bulbs, leaving most to continue growing to ensure next year's abundance. The smell is sharp and green and alive, so different from the musty scent of storage cellars and dried foods that has dominated your world for months. Your grandmother works beside you, moving slowly but steadily, her experienced hands selecting the best plants, leaving the rest. The forest provides, she says, but only if we take with wisdom. These spring plants, they are the forest's gift to those who survived winter, but they are also a test. It would be easy to take too much, to strip every green thing in our hunger. But if we did, next spring would offer nothing. You fill your basket with measured care, grateful for every leaf, every bulb, but restraining yourself from the greed that hunger encourages. The basket grows heavier, and you realise with something like joy that tonight's meal will have fresh food, will taste of something other than storage and preservation. As you work, you hear sounds in the forest, not the silence of winter, but the returning noise of the life. Birds call, their voices rusty from disuse, practicing the songs they will need for mating and territory. Somewhere distant you hear a woodpecker's drumming. Water runs in small streams, snowmelt flowing downhill seeking low places. The forest is waking, and the sound of it is like music after months of quiet. Your grandmother straightens, listening. Her face changes, becomes more alert. "Do you hear?" she asks. You stop your work and listen more carefully. At first, you hear only what you have been hearing. Birds, water, wind in branches. But then, underneath something else. A sound that might be animal, might be wind, might be something neither. A low sound, almost a hum, coming from deeper in the forest. "What is it?" you whisper, though you do not know why you whisper. "The forest singing," your grandmother says. "It does this in spring when the sap rises, when everything wakes at once. Some say it is just the wind through the trees, the water in the streams, all the small sounds combining. But I think it is something more. I think the forest has a voice, and this is when it speaks." You stand very still, listening. The sound continues, rises and falls, neither threatening nor welcoming, simply present. It makes you feel small, reminds you that you're standing in something vast and old, something that was here long before your village, that will be here long after. "Come," your grandmother says after a time. "We have what we need. We should not linger when the forest is in this mood, not dangerous but unpredictable, like any creature newly wakened." You follow her back along the path, your basket heavy with greens, your mind full of the forest's song. As you near the village, the sound fades, or perhaps you simply move beyond its range, back into the human sphere where such things are muted. That evening, the family gathers around a meal that includes the fresh greens, quickly boiled with a precious bit of salt. The taste is intense, almost overwhelming after the bland monotony of winter food. sharp and vital and unmistakably alive. You see your father close his eyes as he chews, savouring, and your mother actually smiles, something you have not seen in weeks. Even the baby seems more content, perhaps receiving some benefit through your mother's milk, perhaps simply responding to the lifted mood in the cottage. After the meal, as the light fades and the family sits by the fire, your grandmother speaks of the spring work that lies ahead. Soon the fields must be prepared, she says. The ploughing, the planting, all of it must be timed correctly. Too early, and a late frost kills the seeds. Too late, and the growing season is too short. Your father nods. The village council meets tomorrow to decide the timing. We will read the signs, the budding of certain trees, the return of certain birds, the temperature of the soil, the old markers. And the forest boundaries must be walked, your grandmother adds. The markers checked, the clearings maintained. Spring is when the forest pushes back hardest, when it tries to reclaim what we have taken. We must be vigilant, but also respectful. Push too hard, and we invite consequences. Not hard enough, and the forest swallows the fields. You think about this balance, this constant negotiation. The village exists in a space carved from the forest, maintained through endless effort, permitted through mysterious agreements. It is not a conquest, but a conversation, conducted in actions more than words, in offerings and restraints and careful attention to invisible lines. The next days are busy with spring work. Your father and brother join the other men in the fields, beginning the labour of turning the soil, breaking up the ground that has been compacted by winter's weight. They use wooden ploughs pulled by the village's few oxen, walking behind the animals in the muddy furrows, guiding the blade that cuts and turns the earth. You and your mother work in the garden plot, preparing it for planting. The work is hard, digging out the weeds that have somehow survived winter, working in the precious manure from the animal shelter, breaking up clods of soil, creating the conditions for growth. Your hands develop new blisters on top of old calluses, and your back aches from the constant bending, but there is satisfaction in the work, in preparing for abundance after scarcity. Your grandmother spends her days attending to the sick. Winter has left many people weakened, susceptible to the illnesses that come with spring's dampness. She goes from cottage to cottage, bringing her remedies, her knowledge, her steady presence. You watch her leave each morning with her basket of herbs and tinctures, and you understand that this work is as essential as farming, that keeping people alive and functional is its own form of cultivation. One afternoon you're sent to the forest edge to gather more greens. The family needs them, and the village needs them, and there are enough now that careful harvesting will not deplete them. You go alone this time, your grandmother trusting that you know the safe paths, the proper restraint, the necessary cautions. You work your way along the forest border, finding patches of nettles, carefully pinching off the top leaves with cloth-wrapped fingers to avoid the sting. You find more ramps, more chickweed, a patch of early violets whose leaves are edible and whose flowers are beautiful, small spots of purple against the brown earth. As you work, you become aware of a presence, not threatening exactly, but noticeable, the sensation of being watched. You straighten slowly, scanning the forest. At first you see nothing unusual. Then, perhaps 20 paces away, partially hidden by a thicket, you see eyes. Large eyes, dark and liquid, watching you with animal intelligence. A deer. A doe, you think, though you cannot see her whole body. She stands utterly still, her gaze fixed on you, and you stand equally still, your basket of greens forgotten, your breath caught in your chest. You have seen deer before, of course, glimpsed at a distance, their bodies flashing between trees, their white tails raised in alarm. But never like this, never so close, never with this quality of mutual observation. The doe is studying you as carefully as you are studying her, and for a long moment you exist together in a space outside normal time, predator and prey, though which is unclear, simply sharing the boundary between village and forest. Then, with a movement so slight you almost miss it, the doe turns and steps deeper into the trees, not fleeing, not frightened, simply choosing to move on. She pauses once, looks back over her shoulder, her ears forward, and then she is gone, absorbed by the forest as completely as if she had never been. You release your breath, realizing you have been holding it. Your heart beats quickly, though you have not been frightened, not exactly. It is more like awe or recognition, the understanding that you have been seen by the forest, acknowledged in some way, and found, acceptable, perhaps, or at least not threatening enough to flee from immediately. You finish your gathering and return to the village, the basket full, your mind full of the encounter. You tell your grandmother about the doe, and she listens with her full attention, nodding slowly. She was measuring you, your grandmother says, deciding if you belong, if you understand the rules. The fact that she did not flee immediately, that is good. That means the forest recognizes you as one who walks carefully, who takes only what is needed. But how can she know that, you ask? How can an animal judge such things? Your grandmother smiles slightly. Perhaps she is only an animal, or perhaps she is also something more, a messenger, an avatar, representative of the forest's awareness. Does it matter? What matters is that you were respectful, that you did not grab for more than your share, that you stood still and let her make her own choice about leaving. These things are noticed. That night, you dream of the doe. In the dream she speaks, though her mouth does not move, her voice appearing directly in your mind. She tells you things you will not remember when you wake, secrets about the forest, about the old agreements, about the balance that must be maintained. When you wake, the words are gone, but the feeling remains, a sense of having been taught something important, something that lives in your body rather than your conscious mind. The spring work continues, intensifies. The village council decides the time is right, and the planting begins. Seeds carefully hoarded through winter now going into the prepared earth, each one a prayer, a hope, a bet on the future. Your father and the other men work dawn to dusk, planting the fields in the prescribed order. First the hardy crops that can tolerate late frost, then the more delicate ones as the weather warms. But even as the village plants and plans and works towards summer's abundance, there is an unease in the air. Several people report seeing things at the forest edge, shadows that move wrong, sounds that do not match any known animal, a general sense of being watched more intently than usual. Your grandmother attends more births than normal, and several of them are difficult, as if the babies are reluctant to enter the world, sensing something amiss. One evening, the village elder calls a gathering. The elder is a man now, older than your father, with a face like weathered wood and eyes that miss nothing. He stands in the village commons and everyone gathers, even the children, even your grandmother who rarely attends public meetings. The forest is restless, the elder says without preamble, more restless than usual for spring. Several of you have reported unusual signs. I have consulted the records such as they are, and similar patterns have occurred before, always preceding a year of testing, when the boundaries must be reaffirmed, when the agreements must be renewed in some significant way. He pauses, looking around at the assembled villagers. We do not know what form this testing will take. It may be nothing dramatic, perhaps simply a harder summer, a more demanding harvest. Or it may be something more direct. What matters is that we remain faithful to our obligations, that we do not panic, that we trust in the old ways that have sustained us. Your father stands. What should we do? How do we prepare? The elder considers. Continue the offerings. Be more attentive to the boundaries. If you see signs of the forest encroaching where it should not, report it. Do not enter the deep forest alone, for any reason. And, he hesitates, watch the children. Keep them close. There are stories of years like this, when the forest sought to claim young ones for reasons we do not understand. You feel your mother's hand find yours, grip it tightly. Around the commons, other parents draw their children closer, their faces showing the same fear, the primal terror of losing what is most precious. The gathering disperses slowly, people returning to their cottages with troubled faces, and that night your family bars the door more securely than usual, and your grandmother places extra offerings on the threshold. Salt, bread, a small carved figure that she has kept for years, saying it has protective power. You lie on your sleeping bench, listening to the spring night beyond the walls, and you wonder what the forest wants, what it is testing, and whether your family, whether the village, will prove worthy when the testing comes. The summer arrives with its own rhythm, bringing warmth that bakes the earth and light that stretches the days until it seems the sun barely sets before rising again. The planted fields begin to show their promise, green shoots pushing through the soil, organised in rows that speak of human intention imposed upon the land. The work is constant, weeding, watering when the rains do not come, watching for pests and blights, the endless vigilance required to transform seeds into sustenance. You spend your days divided between the garden plot and the forest edge, gathering what grows wild to supplement what grows tame. Your grandmother's teachings have become part of your hands, your eyes, your instincts. You know which plants to harvest and which to leave, which mushrooms are safe and which will kill, which berries are ripe and which need more time. The knowledge sits in your body like a second language, spoken without conscious thought. But the unease that began in spring has not dissipated. If anything, it has grown stronger, more defined. The forest feels closer somehow, as if it has leaned toward the village, pressing against the invisible boundaries that separate cultivated from wild. Several families report that clearings they have maintained for years are being invaded by saplings that seem to grow with unnatural speed. Others find their animal traps empty day after day, as if something is reaching them first, taking what was caught and leaving no trace. Your grandmother grows quieter as summer deepens, spending more time in contemplation, often standing at the cottage door in the early morning or late evening, staring toward the forest with an expression you cannot read. When you ask her what troubles her, she shakes her head. "Something is coming," she says finally, after days of your patient waiting. "I feel it in my bones, in my dreams. The forest is gathering itself, preparing for something. Whether it is punishment or test or simply a shift in the old balance, I cannot say, but it is coming, and we must be ready." "Ready how?" you ask. She turns from the doorway to look at you, and her eyes are tired, ancient. "By being what we have always been, faithful, careful, respectful. By remembering that we live here by permission, not by right. By honouring the agreements even when, especially when, they are difficult." The summer solstice approaches, the longest day of the year, and the village prepares for the ritual that marks it. This is not a Christian observance, though the village has accepted the cross and the priest who comes twice yearly from the distant town. This is older, something from before, woven so deeply into the life at the forest's edge that it cannot be separated from survival itself. Your grandmother explains the ritual to you with more detail than she has before, recognizing perhaps that you are old enough now to understand, to carry the knowledge forward when she no longer can. On the solstice, she says, when the light is strongest, we make offerings at the 4 directions, north, south, east and west, at the boundary points where village meets forest. The offerings acknowledge the sun's power, thank the forest for its forbearance, and request continued balance through the second half of the year. 4 people are chosen, 1 for each direction, and they must walk alone to their appointed place, leave the offering and return before sunset. "Is it dangerous?" you ask, though you already know the answer. "It can be," she admits. "The solstice is a liminal time, light at its peak, but also the moment when the turn begins, when darkness starts its slow return. The boundaries between worlds grow thin. Those who walk to the offering places sometimes see things, hear things, encounter things that do not exist at other times, but the ritual must be performed. To omit it would be to break faith in the most serious way. The village council meets to choose the 4 who will carry the offerings. The selection is done by drawing marked stones from a basket, chance or fate, or the will of whatever powers watch over such things. Your father does not draw a stone this year. He has already fulfilled his duty recently with the autumn offering walk. Your brother is too young, not yet considered fully adult. Your mother cannot be chosen while she nurses an infant, but your grandmother draws a stone, the Eastern offering. You feel your stomach clench when the stone is revealed, showing its mark. Your grandmother is old, frailer than she appears, worn by the winter and by decades of hard living. But she nods calmly, accepting, as if she expected this, as if perhaps she even hoped for it. It is appropriate, she says to the gathered council. The east is the direction of dawn, of beginnings, and I am near my ending, so perhaps it is right that I honour the place where things start, to remind the forest that endings and beginnings are part of the same cycle. The other 3 chosen are a young man barely past boyhood, a woman of middle years known for her steady character, and old Pyotr, who keeps watch at the gate and who has walked the offering path twice before. They accept their stones with varying degrees of calm, and the council disperses to prepare. The next 3 days are spent in preparation. The offerings must be perfect. No damaged grain, no spoiled honey, no flawed craftsmanship in the woven grass bundles that will hold everything. Your grandmother fasts, eating only thin broth and drinking water, purifying herself for the walk. She spends hours in meditation, and you hear her sometimes speaking words in the old language, prayers or chants or spells. You're not sure which, and she does not explain. You help her prepare the offering bundle with meticulous care. Each element has meaning, she tells you. The grain represents the harvest, the sustenance the village draws from the land. The honey represents sweetness, the good relations the village seeks to maintain. The woven grass represents the interweaving of human and forest, the binding of the agreement. A small clay figurine, shaped vaguely like a human, represents the village itself, the people who dwell at the boundary. On the morning of the solstice, the 4 chosen gather in the village commons before dawn. The entire village turns out to witness the departure, standing in the grey light, silent and solemn. The elder speaks a blessing, asking for protection and safe return. Each of the 4 is given their bundle and their directions, specific landmarks to follow, specific places to leave the offerings, specific prohibitions about looking back or speaking to anything they might encounter. Your grandmother embraces you before she leaves. Her body feels light in your arms, almost insubstantial, as if she's already partly elsewhere. Remember what I have taught you, she whispers. All of it. And remember that the forest is not evil, only other. If something happens to me, do not think it is punishment. Think of it as transformation, as becoming part of something larger. Nothing will happen, you say fiercely, though your throat is tight with fear. You will walk there and back, and you will return to us. She smiles, touches your face. Perhaps. We shall see what the forest decides. And then she walks through the gate, heading east, her small figure moving steadily toward the tree line. The young man goes north, the middle-aged woman goes south, and old Pyotr goes west. The village watches until all 4 have disappeared into the forest, and then there is nothing to do but wait. The day passes with agonizing slowness. No one works the fields. The solstice is a day of rest, of waiting, of collective anxiety. Your mother sits by the cottage, nursing the baby, her eyes distant. Your father and brother occupy themselves with small tasks that need no concentration, their movements automatic and distracted. You cannot settle to anything, moving restlessly between the cottage and the gate, watching the sun track across the sky, measuring the passage of time by its movement. By noon the heat is oppressive, the air thick and still. Thunder rumbles in the distance, though no clouds are visible. The forest seems to shimmer in the heat, its edges indistinct as if it might be breathing, expanding and contracting with some vast inhuman respiration. The first to return is the middle-aged woman, appearing from the southern path in mid-afternoon. She is shaken but whole, her face pale, her hands trembling. She reports that she left the offering at the appointed place, that she heard singing as she walked back, beautiful and terrible in no human voice, but that she followed the prohibition and did not look toward the sound. The young man returns next from the north as the sun begins its descent. He says little, his eyes wide, but he is unharmed. Whatever he experienced, he keeps to himself. Old Pyotr returns from the west as the sun touches the horizon, its light turning golden, then orange, then red. He walks slowly, his ancient body exhausted, but there is something like satisfaction in his face. It is done, he says simply, and allows himself to be led to his cottage. But the eastern path remains empty. The sun sinks lower, and your grandmother does not appear. The village waits, silent now, tense. The elder stands at the gate, watching, his face grave. Your father stands beside you, his hand on your shoulder, whether to comfort you or steady himself, you cannot tell. The sun sets, twilight deepens, and just as the last light is fading from the sky, just as hope begins to die, a figure emerges from the eastern path, your grandmother, walking slowly but steadily, her face serene, almost luminous in the dim light. She passes through the gate, and the village exhales collectively, tension releasing. But you notice immediately that something is different about her. Her eyes have a faraway quality, as if she is seeing more than just the village, more than just the gathered faces. She moves with a strange grace, as if her old body has remembered youth, or as if something else is moving it. She embraces you when she reaches the cottage, and her body feels solid, real, present. "I am home," she says, her voice her own but with something added, some resonance that was not there before. The offering was accepted. The balance holds. "What happened?" you ask. "What did you see?" She looks at you for a long moment, and you see depths in her eyes that you have never noticed before, as if she has travelled somewhere vast and brought back knowledge that cannot be contained in words. "I saw the forest as it truly is," she says quietly. "Not trees and earth and animals, but the pattern beneath those things, the consciousness that moves through everything. I saw that we are part of it, not separate, that the boundaries we maintain are also illusions, necessary illusions perhaps, but not ultimate truth." She moves to the sleeping bench and sits heavily, suddenly looking every one of her years. "I spoke with something," she continues, "or something spoke through the forest to me. It said that the village has been faithful, that the testing was past, that the agreements will continue, but it also said that changes are coming, that the world is shifting, that what has been stable will become less so. It said that the knowledge must be preserved, must be passed on, because there may come a time when it is nearly lost, and then it will be needed most." She looks at you directly. "That is why I am telling you this, child. You must carry what I have taught you. You must teach your daughters as I have taught you. The knowledge must not die, because if it does, the agreements die with it, and then—" She trails off, shaking her head. "Then the forest will reclaim everything, and there will be no place for human villages at the boundary." The days following the solstice are strange. Your grandmother seems both more present and more distant, engaged with daily life, but also clearly carrying something new, some burden or blessing of knowledge that she cannot fully share. She continues her healing work, continues teaching you, continues the daily round of tasks, but there is a quality of finality to her actions, as if she's completing something, bringing things to a close. One evening, as you sit together carding wool, she speaks suddenly. "When I am gone," she says, "you will find a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, hidden in the rafters above the oven. In it are things you will need. dried herbs that do not grow near here, written marks on birch bark that show remedies and rituals, objects that carry protective power. Take them when the time comes. They are yours now, your inheritance, your tools for continuing the work. You're not going anywhere, you say, though your voice lacks conviction. She smiles gently. Not yet, but soon enough. I am tired, child. I have lived long and seen much and carried heavy knowledge. I am ready for rest, for transformation, for whatever comes next. Do not grieve too much when the time comes. Death is part of the cycle, as natural as seed becoming plant, becoming seed again. The summer continues its progression toward autumn. The fields ripen, promising good harvest. The forest remains quiet, almost peaceful, as if the solstice ritual has indeed renewed the balance, satisfied whatever needed satisfaction. Life continues in its rhythms, and you begin to believe that perhaps the crisis has passed, that perhaps everything will continue as it always has. But you also begin to pay closer attention to your grandmother's teachings, to memorize more carefully, to practice more diligently. Because you understand now, in a way you did not before, that this knowledge is not eternal, that it lives in human minds and hands, and when those fail, it can be lost. And you understand that you are being prepared, whether you feel ready or not, to become the next keeper of the agreements, the next one who stands between village and forest, translating between human need and wildness's indifference. And as the summer slowly turns toward autumn, as the light begins to shorten again and the first hints of coolness enter the evening air, you wonder what the next turn of the wheel will bring, what tests await, what changes are coming that your grandmother sensed but could not describe, and whether you will have the strength and wisdom to meet them when they arrive. The autumn comes with its particular beauty, the forest transforming into flames of colour, gold and crimson and deep orange, the trees preparing to shed their leaves in the ancient cycle of conservation and renewal. The harvest is good this year, better than expected, and the village works with grateful urgency to gather everything before the first frost claims what remains in the fields. You're taller now, stronger, your body shaped by the seasons of work, your hands as capable as your grandmother's once were. You move through the days with increasing confidence, gathering herbs, preparing remedies, assisting with births and illnesses, learning the last secrets your grandmother has to teach. She works beside you when she can, but more often now she sits and directs, her body failing while her mind remains sharp, her voice growing softer but her knowledge undiminished. The harvest moon rises full and enormous, hanging low in the sky like a great orange lantern, illuminating the fields where the last of the grain stands in sheaves. The entire village works by its light, knowing that weather can change suddenly, that what is not gathered now may be lost. You work, alongside your family, binding sheaves, loading carts, carrying the fruits of the summer's labour into storage buildings and root cellars. Your grandmother sits wrapped in blankets near the field's edge, watching the work, and when you bring her water, she smiles. "A good harvest," she says. "The forest has been generous this year. The offerings were accepted, the balance held. The village will survive another winter." "Will you?" you ask quietly, voicing the fear that has grown all autumn as you have watched her diminish, her body becoming more transparent, more fragile, as if she's slowly transforming from solid matter into something lighter, more ephemeral. She reaches for your hand, her fingers cool and thin. "I will see the winter begin," she says. "Beyond that I cannot promise. But it does not matter, child. I have lived my time, fulfilled my purpose. What matters is that you are ready to continue the work." "I am not ready," you say, though you know it is not entirely true. You have learned so much, absorbed so many teachings, practiced so many skills. But readiness feels like something that should be absolute, a moment of clarity when you suddenly know everything and you do not feel that. "No one is ever ready," your grandmother says. Readiness comes through doing, not before it. You will learn what you need to learn as you need it. Trust your hands, trust your instincts. Trust what I have planted in you through all these seasons of teaching. The harvest is completed over the following days, and the village holds a feast to celebrate, modest by the standards of richer places, but lavish for people who have known hunger, who understand that abundance is never guaranteed. There is fresh bread, roasted meat from animals slaughtered for winter stores, vegetables still crisp from the fields, honey cakes sweetened with the precious stores, kvass flowing more freely than usual. Your grandmother attends the feast carried to the commons by your father and brother, because she can no longer walk the distance. She sits wrapped in every blanket the family owns, but her eyes are bright, taking in the celebration, the children running and playing, the adults relaxed for one evening, the sense of completion that comes with successful harvest. The elder makes a speech, thanking the village for their labour, acknowledging the challenges survived, expressing hope for the winter ahead. And then he speaks of the old agreements, the ancient understandings that govern life at the forest's edge. We are here because those who came before us negotiated our place, he says. They learned the forest language, honoured its laws, and passed that knowledge to their children. Now we must do the same. The forest has been generous this year, and we must remember that generosity comes with responsibility. He turns to your grandmother, and everyone follows his gaze. Our eldest healer has walked the offering path many times. She has carried our agreements, our respect, our prayers to the deep places. This year she walked the solstice path and returned with confirmation that our faith has been recognized. We honor her tonight for her service, for her wisdom, for her years of standing between us and the wild. The village stands, and in the firelight faces glow with respect and affection. Your grandmother nods, accepting the honor, but she raises a hand for attention. Her voice, when she speaks, is soft but carries clearly in the night air. I have done only what needed doing, she says, as my mother did before me, and her mother before her, back through the generations we can remember, and further into the time before remembering. The work is not mine. It belongs to the village, to the forest, to the ancient balance. I have been merely a vessel for knowledge, a keeper of agreements, a translator between human need and forest wisdom. She pauses, gathering strength. But vessels break, and keepers grow old, and translators must pass their language to the next speaker. I have taught my granddaughter as I was taught. She knows the plants, the remedies, the rituals. She understands respect and restraint. When my time comes, she will continue the work. Trust her as you have trusted me. Guide her as you have guided me. The knowledge lives not in one person, but in the relationship between healer and community, between village and forest, between what we know and what we can never fully know. The feast continues, but more quietly now, people moved by her words, by the recognition of change approaching. You sit beside your grandmother, and she takes your hand, holding it with surprising strength. You will do well, she whispers. You have a good heart and careful hands. That is enough. That is everything. The autumn deepens, and your grandmother's prediction proves accurate. She sees the first snowfall, watching from the cottage window as white flakes descend, blanketing the world in quiet. She sees the village prepare for winter once more, sees the storage pits filled, the wood stacked, the animals brought into shelter. And then, on a night when the wind howls and the fire burns low, she calls you to her side. It is time, she says simply. I am ready to go. But before I do, there are final things you must know. She speaks through the night, her voice growing fainter but never faltering, telling you things she has not told before. Deeper knowledge, hidden wisdom, the secrets that are passed only at the very end. She tells you about plants that grow in places you have never been, about remedies for ailments you hope never to encounter, about rituals for extreme circumstances, about the history of the village's founding, and the original agreements that were made with the forest when the first clearing was cut. Your great-great-great-grandmother, she says, was the one who made the first agreement. She was a woman of the forest people, not farmers, and she knew the old ways. When the first settlers came seeking to build, she negotiated the terms. The forest would allow the clearing, would permit the village, but only if certain conditions were met. Offerings at the turning points of the year, no hunting in the deep forest, no cutting of the oldest trees, respect for the boundaries, acknowledgement that humans are guests, not masters. She coughs, and you give her water, supporting her head while she drinks. The agreement has held for generations because we have been faithful. But the world is changing, child. Someday there may be pressure to break the old ways, to cut deeper into the forest, to reject the agreements as superstition. You must resist that pressure. You must remember that what seems like superstition is actually the accumulated wisdom of survival, encoded in ritual and story, because that is how important knowledge is preserved across generations. As dawn approaches, her breathing changes, becomes more laboured, and you know the end is very near. Your mother wakes, and your father, and they gather around the sleeping bench. The baby sleeps through it, innocent of death, but your brother stands at the foot of the bench, his face solemn, understanding that he is witnessing something significant. Your grandmother looks at each of you in turn, her eyes expressing what her voice can no longer manage, and then she looks at you last and longest, and in that gaze is everything. Love, trust, faith, that you will continue what she has begun, acceptance of her own ending, and something else, something like relief that her burden can finally be set down. She closes her eyes as the first light of dawn touches the window. Her breathing slows, becomes shallow, and then, between one breath and the next, she simply stops. The cottage is utterly silent. Even the fire seems to pause in its crackling. Your mother begins to weep quietly, and your father puts his arm around her, and you sit holding your grandmother's hand, feeling the warmth slowly leave it, feeling the presence that was her spirit depart, leaving only the shell of her body behind. The village comes when word spreads. The elder arrives to perform the death rites, speaking the words that honour the dead and comfort the living. Your grandmother's body is washed and wrapped in clean linen, prepared for burial. The grave is dug at the village's edge, in the small cemetery where all the dead are laid, far enough from the forest to be human territory, but close enough that the forest can witness, can know that the village remembers its mortality, its participation in the cycle of growth and decay. The burial is attended by everyone, and many speak of your grandmother, of healing she performed, of wisdom she shared, of times she helped families through crisis. You listen to these testimonies, learning dimensions of her life you never knew, understanding that she touched the village in ways beyond what you witnessed, that her influence spread through the community like roots through soil, invisible but essential. After the burial, after the ritual meal, after the visitors have departed and the cottage is quiet again, you remember her words about the bundle in the rafters. You wait until evening when the family sleeps, and then you carefully climb and reach into the space above the oven, feeling through the accumulated storage until your fingers find something wrapped in oilcloth, tied with cord. You bring it down carefully and unwrap it by the fire's dim light. Inside are treasures, bundles of herbs you have never seen, each labelled in your grandmother's careful hand with marks you're only beginning to decipher. Pieces of birch bark covered with symbols, some you recognise as remedies, others as rituals, still others completely mysterious. A small carved figure of a woman, very old, her features worn smooth by handling, a handful of stones, each one marked with a different sign, and at the bottom a letter, written in the careful script your grandmother learned as a girl, addressed to you. You read it slowly, your grandmother's voice echoing in your mind as you pass her words. My dear child, If you are reading this, I am gone, and you are now the keeper of the knowledge. Do not be afraid. You have been well taught, and you carry within you everything needed to continue the work. Trust yourself. Trust the forest. Trust the ancient agreements. The world will change, and you must change with it, but some truths remain constant. The forest was here before us, and will be here after us. Our role is to live in balance, to take only what we need, to give back more than we take, to remember that we are part of something larger than human concerns. Keep the offerings, walk the boundaries, teach your daughters as I taught you. And know that I walk with you still, in the knowledge you carry, in the skills you have learned, in the understanding of balance and respect that now lives in your bones. You're not alone. You never were. The forest sees you, the ancestors watch over you, and I am proud of what you will become. You sit by the fire, the letter in your hands, tears running down your face. Not only grief, but also gratitude, recognition, and a strange sense of rightness, as if everything has led to this moment, as if you are exactly where you're meant to be. The winter passes, your first winter as the village's healer, and you do the work your grandmother did, tending the sick, attending births, preparing remedies, offering wisdom. The villagers come to you hesitantly at first, uncertain whether one so young can carry the knowledge of one so old, but your hands remember what to do, and your voice carries the authority of training and purpose, and slowly they learn to trust you as they trusted her. The spring comes, and you make the seasonal gathering trips, walking the forest paths your grandmother walked, seeing through her eyes, hearing her voice in the bird songs and wind sounds. The forest accepts you. You feel this clearly, recognizes you as the continuation of the old agreement, the next link in the chain of human-forest understanding that stretches back generations. Years pass, and you teach others as you were taught. Your own daughters learn the plants, the remedies, the rituals. Your brother's children come to you for lessons. The knowledge spreads through the village, not concentrated in one person now, but distributed, shared, living in the community rather than in an individual. The agreements hold because the people remember why they matter, because the stories are told and retold, because each generation learns the cost of forgetting. You grow older, become the grandmother yourself, and new children look at you with the same mixture of awe and trust that you once directed toward your own teacher. You tell them stories of the woman who walked the solstice path, who spoke with the forest's consciousness, who passed down knowledge that keeps the village safe. You tell them about balance and respect, about boundaries and offerings, about the importance of knowing your place in the larger pattern. And sometimes, in the deep forest, when you go to gather rare herbs or to leave offerings at the sacred places, you feel a presence, not threatening, not even quite personal, but aware and watching. You understand now what your grandmother meant when she said the forest knows. It does know in ways that cannot be reduced to human language or logic. It knows the faithful from the faithless, the respectful from the exploitative, those who understand balance from those who would take without giving. The village endures, generation after generation, held in place by the old agreements, by the continued willingness of people to honour commitments made before their time, to restrain themselves even when restraint is difficult, to remember that they are guests rather than conquerors. The forest provides, and the village survives, and the knowledge passes from grandmother to grandchild, from keeper to keeper, a living tradition that adapts to changing circumstances while preserving the essential wisdom at its core. And in this way, the ancient balance is maintained. Not perfectly, never perfectly, because humans are imperfect and the forest is vast and unknowable, but well enough. Well enough that children are born and grow and have children of their own. Well enough that harvests come and sustain life through winters. Well enough that when you are old and your time comes to cross the boundary between life and death, you can look back and know that you did what needed doing, that you kept faith with those who came before, that you passed the knowledge to those who come after. The story continues, as stories do, beyond any one teller, beyond any single life. It lives in the village that still stands at the forest's edge, in the offering still made at the turning of seasons, in the children still taught to respect the boundaries, to honour the agreements, to remember that human life exists within a larger web of relationships, and that wisdom lies not in dominating, but in understanding one's place within the pattern. Your grandmother's legacy endures not in monuments or written histories, but in this, in a village that survives, in a forest that permits that survival, in knowledge that passes from hand to hand and heart to heart, in the quiet continuation of ancient understandings that ask only to be remembered, to be honoured, to be lived. And perhaps, in some way beyond human comprehension, she endures as well. Not as a ghost or spirit in the usual sense, but as a presence woven into the forest itself, into the agreements she upheld, into the knowledge she preserved. Perhaps when future keepers walk the offering paths, they feel her walking with them. Perhaps when they face difficult decisions, they hear her voice in the wind through the trees, reminding them of what matters, of what must be preserved. The forest remembers, because the forest is memory itself, layers upon layers of growth and decay, of life feeding on death, feeding on life, of patterns repeating across scales of time that dwarf human measurement. And in that vast memory, your grandmother's faithfulness, her careful stewardship, her lifetime of honouring the balance, these things are recorded in ways more permanent than stone, more enduring than any human chronicle. The wheel turns, seasons follow seasons, generations give way to generations, but the essential truth remains. Those who live at the boundary between wild and tame, between known and unknown, between human order and nature's deeper patterns, these people carry a particular responsibility, a particular wisdom, a particular kind of courage. It is not the courage of warriors or heroes, but the courage of patience, of restraint, of faith in agreements whose origins are lost in time but whose necessity is proven through continued survival. And so, the story ends where it began, with a village at the forest's edge, with people who gather herbs and make offerings, who respect boundaries and honour the old ways, who understand that they would not survive without the wisdom passed down through generations, without the agreements made before memory, without the willingness to see themselves as part of something larger, older, and ultimately unfathomable. The forest watches as it has always watched, and the village endures as it has always endured. And between them, the balance holds, fragile and strong, ancient and renewed with each generation, a testament to the possibility that humans and wilderness might coexist, not through domination, but through respect, not through conquest, but through careful attention to the terms that make life possible at the boundary where two worlds meet.